The Seattle rain hammered against my apartment window that October evening in 2015, creating rivers of water that distorted the city lights below. I was 23 years old, working the graveyard shift at a downtown convenience store, barely making enough to cover rent in my studio apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. My life had become a cycle of sleep deprivation, instant ramen, and the crushing weight of student loan debt from a degree I never finished. I had dropped out of the University of Washington in my junior year after my mother passed away from cancer. Dad had left when I was 7, and Mom was all I had. After she died, I couldn't focus on anything. The classes felt meaningless, the campus felt empty, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of people who had their lives figured out while I was barely treading water. That night, I came home at 3 in the morning, soaked from the walk from the bus stop. My mailbox was usually full of bills and junk mail, but tucked between a credit card offer and an overdue electric bill was a handwritten envelope. The paper was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with my name written in careful cursive. There was no return address. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, peeled off my wet jacket, and sat on the edge of my mattress on the floor. I didn't even have a proper bed frame. I opened the envelope carefully, and inside was a single page, also handwritten in that same elegant script. The letter read, "Dear Marcus, you don't know me, but I know about you. I heard from a friend who works at Sacred Heart Hospital that you spent every night by your mother's bedside during her final weeks. I heard that you read to her, played her favorite music, and held her hand when she took her last breath. I heard that you sold your textbooks to pay for flowers for her funeral because you wanted her service to be beautiful. I'm writing to tell you that the love you showed your mother in her darkest hours is not common. Most people run from pain. You ran toward it. You have a heart that this world desperately needs. I know you're struggling right now. I know you feel lost. But I promise you, Marcus, your life has purpose. The same strength that carried you through your mother's illness will carry you through this darkness. Don't give up. Someone out there needs the kindness that lives inside you. One day, you'll save someone's life, and you'll understand why you had to survive this pain. With hope for your future, a friend you haven't met yet." I read that letter 5 times that night. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of my bedside table, which was really just a cardboard box turned on its side. I didn't know who had sent it. I didn't know how they knew about Mom, about the hospital, about any of it. But something about those words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The weeks that followed were still hard. I still worked the graveyard shift. I still ate ramen 4 nights a week. But whenever the darkness crept in, whenever I thought about the bottle of sleeping pills in my medicine cabinet and wondered if taking all of them would finally stop the pain, I would take out that letter and read it again. Someone believed I had purpose. Someone thought I could save a life. I didn't believe it myself, but I held on to their belief like a rope in a storm. 6 months after receiving that letter, I walked into the Seattle Fire Department Training Academy and applied for their recruit program. I had no idea if I'd make it. I was skinny, depressed, and had no experience with physical labor beyond stocking shelves. But the letter had planted a seed. If someone out there thought I could save lives, maybe I should try. The academy was brutal. The physical training pushed me further than I'd ever been pushed. We ran miles in the rain, climbed ladders with weighted packs, dragged dummies through obstacle courses, and learned to move through smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hands. There were 40 recruits in my class. 12 dropped out in the first month. I almost quit on week 3. We were doing a drill where we had to search a burning building simulator in full gear, crawling through pitch-black rooms filled with artificial smoke, feeling our way along walls, learning to read the heat, the sounds, the subtle changes in air pressure that told you where the fire was. I got disoriented, panicked, and had to be pulled out by one of the instructors. That night, I sat in my car in the academy parking lot and cried. I was failing. I wasn't strong enough. The letter had been wrong about me. But then I took it out of my wallet, where I'd started keeping it folded in the bill compartment. I read it again under the dome light of my beat-up Honda Civic. Someone believed in me. Maybe I should believe in myself long enough to try one more day. I went back the next morning, and the next, and the one after that. Slowly, something changed. My body got stronger. My lungs adapted to the smoke. My mind learned to stay calm when everything around me was chaos. The instructors noticed. Captain Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with a scar across his jaw from a roof collapse, pulled me aside after a particularly good drill. He said, "Chen, you got something most of these kids don't have. You got heart. I've seen plenty of guys with muscles and medals wash out because when things get real, they don't have what it takes to run into the fire. You do. I don't know where it comes from, but don't lose it." I graduated from the academy in April 2016. My class photo shows 40 recruits at the start and 28 at graduation. I was number 17 from the left in the back row, skinny compared to most of the others, but I was there. I had made it. I kept the letter in my locker at Station 28 in the Ballard neighborhood, where I was assigned as a probationary firefighter. Every shift, before we did equipment checks and training drills, I would touch the locker door and remember those words. Your life has purpose. One day you'll save someone's life. The first 2 years were mostly medical calls, small kitchen fires, and false alarms. I learned the rhythms of the job. The long stretches of maintenance work and training interrupted by sudden bursts of adrenaline. The dark humor that firefighters use to process the tragedies we witness. The brotherhood that forms when you trust people with your life every day. I also learned about the weight of the job. The calls where we arrived too late. The elderly man who died of a heart attack before we could get the ambulance through downtown traffic. The overdose victim we couldn't revive despite 20 minutes of CPR. The car accident where a drunk driver killed a family of 4. After bad calls, I would sit in the station bunkroom and take out the letter. I would read it and wonder if I was actually making a difference, or if I was just witnessing tragedy on repeat. But there were good calls too. The child we pulled from a swimming pool who started breathing again. The elderly woman we rescued from her bathroom after she'd fallen and broken her hip and been lying there for 2 days. The man having a heart attack we got to the hospital in time for the doctors to save. Those calls made it worth it. Those calls reminded me why I had joined. By 2018, I had moved from probationary to full firefighter status. I had my own gear, my own bunk, my own place in the crew. Station 28 became my second home. The guys on my shift, a shift, became my family. There was Captain Rodriguez, who had taken a liking to me during training. Lieutenant Morrison, a calm presence who could read a fire scene like a book. Jenkins and Cooper, the veterans who had 15 years each and had seen everything. And there was Sarah, the only woman on our shift, who could outwork any of us and had a wicked sense of humor that kept morale up during long shifts. Life was better. I had moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment in Fremont. Nothing fancy, but it had real furniture and I could afford to eat actual meals. I was paying down my student loans slowly. I had purpose. I was doing work that mattered. But I never forgot the letter. I never stopped wondering who had sent it. Who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Who had somehow known that I needed those exact words at that exact moment. I thought about trying to find them. I could have asked around at the hospital, tried to track down who might have known about Mom's final days. But something stopped me. Maybe I was afraid that the reality wouldn't live up to the mystery. Maybe I was afraid that knowing who sent it would somehow diminish its power. So I kept it as my secret talisman. My reminder that even in the darkest times, someone somewhere might believe in you. I had no idea that 9 years later, on a cold November morning in 2024, I would finally meet the person who wrote those words. And that the meeting would happen in the worst possible way. November 7th, 2024, started like any other shift at Station 28. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 40s, typical Seattle autumn weather. I arrived at the station at 6 in the morning for the shift change briefing, grabbed coffee from the pot that was always brewing in the kitchen, and joined the rest of a shift around the table. Captain Rodriguez ran through the day's assignments. Cooper and Jenkins would handle equipment maintenance. Sarah would lead medical training. Morrison would work on inspection reports. I was paired with a new probie named Davis for building familiarization in our district. At 41 years old, I was now one of the veterans. The skinny kid who barely made it through the academy had filled out, gained muscle and confidence. I had 9 years of experience, countless calls under my belt, and 3 commendations for lives saved. The letter was still in my locker, creased and faded now, but still there. Davis was 24, eager, reminded me of myself 9 years ago. We spent the morning driving around the Ballard neighborhood, reviewing hydrant locations, building layouts, access points. It was routine work, but essential. Knowing your district could mean the difference between life and death when seconds counted. We got back to the station at 11:30 for lunch. Sarah had made her famous chili, and we were just sitting down to eat when the tones dropped. Structure fire. Residential. 4521 Maple Street. All units respond. The station exploded into motion. We had rehearsed this 1,000 times. Boots on, turnout gear grabbed from the racks, helmet secured, gloves pulled tight. I was on engine 28 with Rodriguez, Morrison, and Davis. Sarah and the others took ladder 28. The sirens wailed as we pulled out of the station, heading east toward the address. Maple Street was an older residential area, houses built in the 50s and 60s, mostly single-family homes with small yards. This time of day, late morning on a Thursday, most people would be at work or school. We arrived on scene in 4 minutes. The house was a single-story craftsman-style home, probably 1,500 square feet, with gray siding and white trim. Smoke was pouring from the eastern side, dark gray smoke that indicated a well-involved fire. Flames were visible through the windows. Rodriguez was already on the radio calling for additional units as Morrison and I pulled the attack line from the engine. Davis was right behind us, doing exactly what he was supposed to do, following our lead. A woman in her 60s stood on the sidewalk in her bathrobe, crying hysterically. A neighbor had his arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her. Morrison ran over to get information while Rodriguez, Davis, and I approached the structure. Morrison came back at a run. He shouted over the sound of the fire, "Woman says her daughter is inside. Bedroom on the east side." She went back in to get the cat and didn't come out. My stomach dropped. The east side was fully involved. That was where the main fire was. But if someone was in there, we had minutes at best. Rodriguez made the call. "Chen, Morrison, you're going in. Davis, stay on the line outside. We need water on that east wall now." Morrison and I masked up, checked each other's gear with the practiced efficiency of 9 years of partnership, and approached the front door. The heat radiating from the house was intense even from 10 feet away. Through my mask, I could hear my own breathing, steady and controlled despite the adrenaline. Morrison kicked the door in. Smoke poured out, a thick black cloud that reduced visibility to 0. We dropped to our hands and knees and crawled in, the attack line between us, feeling our way into the house. The interior was an oven. Even through my turnout gear, I could feel the heat pressing against me from all sides. The training kicked in automatically. Stay low. Read the heat. Listen to the fire. Move systematically. The layout was typical for this era of house. Living room to the right, kitchen straight ahead, hallway to the left leading to bedrooms. The smoke was thickest toward the east side, toward the bedrooms, exactly where we needed to go. Morrison and I moved down the hallway, staying close to the wall, sweeping our free hands across the floor, feeling for a body. The sound of the fire was deafening, a roaring, hungry sound punctuated by the crack of wood and the crash of something collapsing in another room. The first bedroom was empty. We checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the door. Nothing. The smoke was getting thicker, hotter. We moved to the next bedroom. The door was closed, which had probably saved whoever was inside from the worst of the smoke. Morrison tried the handle. Locked from the inside. He didn't hesitate. He threw his shoulder into the door and it crashed open. The smoke rushed in, and we crawled into the room, immediately spreading out to search. I swept right, along the wall, my hands moving in the practiced pattern. Bed, nightstand, dresser. Then my hand hit something soft. A leg. I shouted, "Got her!" Morrison was beside me in seconds. The woman was unconscious, lying on the floor between the bed and the window, curled in a fetal position. She had a small orange cat clutched against her chest. The cat wasn't moving. I grabbed her under the arms while Morrison took her legs. She was small, maybe 5'4", thin. We lifted her and started moving back toward the hallway. That's when I heard it. The sound every firefighter dreads. A deep groaning crack from above us. The ceiling was failing. Morrison yelled, "Go, go, go!" We moved as fast as we could, crawling backward, dragging the woman between us. Behind us, I heard the crash as part of the ceiling collapsed into the bedroom we'd just left. Burning debris rained down, and the temperature spiked. We made it to the hallway, then to the living room. The front door was a rectangle of gray light through the smoke. We pushed toward it, our lungs burning despite the masks, our muscles screaming with effort. Then we were outside, bursting through the doorway into the cold November air. Other firefighters rushed forward to help. We laid the woman on the grass. Sarah was already there with the medical kit. I pulled off my mask and sucked in the cold air. My lungs felt like they were on fire, my muscles were shaking from the adrenaline and exertion. But we had gotten her out. Sarah checked for a pulse. She said, "Got a pulse, it's weak but it's there. She's breathing but it's shallow. We need medics now." The ambulance was already pulling up. The paramedics took over, putting an oxygen mask on the woman's face, checking her vitals, loading her onto a stretcher. I stood there catching my breath, watching them work. The woman was in her 30s, dark hair, olive skin. Her face was smudged with soot. She was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that said Woodland Park Zoo on it. The cat she'd been holding was being examined by one of the other firefighters, and amazingly, it seemed to be okay, just scared. The older woman from the sidewalk, her mother presumably, rushed over. She was crying, thanking us over and over. She said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please save my daughter, please, she's all I have." Rodriguez put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Ma'am, she's in good hands. The medics are going to take care of her. Why don't you ride with them to the hospital?" The woman nodded, still crying, and climbed into the ambulance. They pulled away, sirens wailing, heading for Swedish Medical Center. We spent the next 3 hours on scene. The fire was knocked down within 20 minutes, but then came the tedious work of overhaul, making sure there were no hot spots that could reignite, documenting the scene, investigating the cause. The fire investigator determined that it had started in the laundry room on the east side, likely an electrical fault in the dryer. The house was a total loss. The east side had collapsed completely, and the rest had significant fire, smoke, and water damage. By mid-afternoon, we were back at the station, cleaning equipment, refilling air bottles, documenting the call. It was good work. We had saved a life. That's what the job was about. But something nagged at me. Something about the woman we'd pulled out. I couldn't put my finger on it. That night, after the shift ended, I drove home to my apartment in Fremont. I had moved 3 years ago to a larger place, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of an older building. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I had furniture that matched. I had a real kitchen. I had bookshelves and a TV and a comfortable couch. I showered, trying to wash the smoke smell out of my hair and skin. It never completely went away after a fire like that. I made dinner, pasta with vegetables, and sat on my couch eating and thinking about the call. My mind kept going back to the woman's face as they loaded her into the ambulance. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Maybe she just had one of those faces. Seattle was a big city, but the neighborhoods could feel small sometimes. I finished dinner, cleaned up, and sat on the couch with my laptop, intending to watch something mindless on Netflix. But instead, I found myself Googling the address. 4521 Maple Street, Seattle. The property records came up. The house was owned by Patricia Whitmore, age 67, widow. She'd bought it in 1995. No mortgage. Property taxes current. Nothing unusual. I searched for Patricia Whitmore. Her social media was private, but I found an obituary for her husband, Robert Whitmore, who had died in 2019 from heart disease. Survived by his wife Patricia and daughter Emma. Emma Whitmore. I searched that name. A LinkedIn profile came up. Emma Whitmore, age 34, occupation listed as social worker at Sacred Heart Hospital. Education from University of Washington School of Social Work, graduated 2015. Sacred Heart Hospital. That was where Mom had died. That was the hospital mentioned in the letter. My heart started beating faster. I clicked through to see if there were any photos, but Emma's profile was mostly private. There was a profile picture, but it was small and the image quality was poor, taken from a distance, showing a woman with dark hair at what looked like a professional conference. It might be nothing. Sacred Heart was a big hospital. Lots of people worked there. It was probably just a coincidence. But something told me it wasn't. I spent the next hour searching for more information. Emma Whitmore had a Facebook profile, but it was completely private. She had an Instagram that was also private. She had contributed to a few articles on the Sacred Heart Hospital website about their social work program, but none of them had photos, just her name as co-author. Finally, I gave up and closed my laptop. I was probably making connections that weren't there, trying to find meaning in coincidence. It had been a long shift, a tough call, and I was tired. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I kept thinking about the letter in my locker. About the woman we'd pulled from the burning house who worked at the hospital where the letter originated. About the timing of it all. The next morning, I called the hospital. I asked for information about Emma Whitmore's condition. The operator told me she couldn't give out patient information, but said that Emma was in stable condition and was expected to make a full recovery. Relief washed over me. She was going to be okay. Whatever connection there might or might not be, at least she was alive. I went to my next shift at Station 28 feeling lighter. We had saved a life. That was what mattered. The rest was just my overactive imagination. But 2 days later, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was my day off. I was at the grocery store in Fremont, trying to decide between 2 different types of pasta sauce, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice, slightly hoarse, said, "Hello, is this Marcus Chen?" I said, "Yeah, this is Marcus." "Who's this?" There was a pause. Then she said, "My name is Emma Whitmore. I think you pulled me out of my house a few days ago. The fire on Maple Street." I stopped walking, right there in the middle of the pasta aisle. I said, "Emma." "Yes." "I was there. How are you doing? Are you okay?" She said, "I'm okay. I was in the hospital for 2 days, mostly for smoke inhalation. They released me yesterday. I'm staying with my mom at her sister's house while we figure out what to do about our place. But that's not why I'm calling." She paused again. I could hear her breathing, like she was trying to figure out how to say something. She continued, "One of the firefighters gave my mom his card. Captain Rodriguez. She called to thank him, and during the conversation, she mentioned my name and where I work. He told her that one of his firefighters, Marcus Chen, had been asking about me at the hospital. He thought it was maybe because you wanted to check on how I was doing, which was really kind. But my mom mentioned it to me, and when she said your name, I remembered something. My heart was pounding. I said, "What did you remember?" She said, "I know this is going to sound strange, but did you have a mother who passed away at Sacred Heart Hospital in 2015? Nancy Chen." The grocery store seemed to fade away. All I could hear was Emma's voice and the sound of my own heartbeat. I said, "Yes. That was my mom." "How do you know that?" Emma's voice got quieter. She said, "Because I wrote you a letter after she died. I was working at Sacred Heart as a social work intern at the time. I met your mother during her final week. You probably don't remember me. I only came by a few times, checking in, seeing if there was anything she needed, anything the family needed." I leaned against the shelf, my legs suddenly weak. I said, "I remember. You had dark hair. You were always very kind. You brought Mom magazines and made sure she had extra pillows." Emma said, "That was me. Your mother talked about you constantly. How proud she was of you. How you'd put your own life on hold to take care of her. How you read to her every night. She showed me photos of you, told me stories about your childhood. She was so worried about what would happen to you after she was gone." My eyes were burning. I was crying in the middle of the grocery store, and I didn't care. I said, "She worried about everything. She didn't want me to drop out of school. She kept telling me to go back, to finish my degree, to live my life." Emma said, "I know. She told me that too. And after she passed, I saw you at her funeral. I stood in the back. I didn't want to intrude. But I saw you standing there alone, and I saw the flowers you'd arranged, and I asked one of the nurses how you were doing. She told me you'd sold your textbooks to pay for the flowers. That you were struggling. That she was worried about you. I remembered that funeral. Small. Just me, a few of Mom's co-workers from the library where she'd worked, and some neighbors. I had stood there in a suit I'd bought at Goodwill, trying to hold myself together, trying to be strong because that's what Mom would have wanted. I said, "So you wrote the letter?" Emma said, "Yes. I went home that night and I couldn't stop thinking about you. About how unfair it was that someone who had shown so much love was left alone to face the world. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. So I wrote you a letter. I didn't put a return address because I didn't want you to feel obligated to respond. I just wanted you to know that someone saw you. Someone recognized the strength and kindness in you. Someone believed you would make it through." I was openly sobbing now. An elderly woman pushing a cart gave me a concerned look and asked if I was okay. I nodded and turned away, trying to compose myself. I said, "That letter saved my life, Emma. I'm not exaggerating. I was in a very dark place. I didn't see a future. I didn't see a point. But your words gave me something to hold on to. They made me believe that maybe I could be worth something. That maybe my life could matter." Emma's voice was thick with emotion. She said, "Your life does matter, Marcus. You proved that by pulling me out of that fire. The doctors said if I'd been in there another 2 minutes, I wouldn't have made it. You saved my life. You became exactly what I hoped you would become. Someone who saves people." We were both crying now. Two strangers connected by tragedy and time, by a letter written 9 years ago, by a fire that had brought us full circle. I said, "I've carried that letter with me every single day since I got it. It's in my locker at the fire station right now. I read it whenever I have a hard call, whenever I doubt myself. It's been my reminder that someone believed in me." Emma said, "I can't believe you kept it. I can't believe it meant that much to you." I said, "It meant everything." There was a long silence. Then Emma said, "Marcus, would you want to meet? I mean, in person? I'd like to thank you properly. And honestly, I'd like to get to know the person you've become. I feel like I've been wondering about you for 9 years." I didn't even hesitate. I said, "Yes. Absolutely. When and where?" We made plans to meet the next day at a coffee shop in Ballard, not far from the station. After we hung up, I stood in that grocery store for another 10 minutes, just trying to process what had happened. The woman who wrote the letter that saved my life. The woman whose life I had just saved. The circle was complete in a way that seemed almost impossible. I abandoned my shopping and drove straight to the station, even though it was my day off. I needed to see the letter. I needed to hold it in my hands and know that this was real. Rodriguez was there, working on paperwork in his office. He looked up surprised when I walked in. He said, "Chen, what are you doing here? You're off today." I said, "I just got a call from Emma Whitmore, the woman from the Maple Street fire." His eyebrows went up. He said, "Yeah. How's she doing?" I said, "She's the one who wrote me the letter, Captain. The one I told you about years ago. The one from after my mom died." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his eyes widening. He said, "You're kidding me." I said, "I wish I was." She was a social work intern at Sacred Heart. She met my mom. She was at the funeral. She wrote the letter because she wanted to give me hope. And 9 years later, I pulled her out of a burning building. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, then he shook his head. He said, "Chen, I've been doing this job for 25 years. I've seen a lot of things. Coincidences, strange connections, moments that make you believe in something bigger. But this might be the most remarkable thing I've ever heard." I went to my locker and took out the letter. I unfolded it carefully, the paper soft and worn from 9 years of handling. I read it again, and this time I could picture Emma writing it. Emma sitting at her kitchen table, thinking about a young man she barely knew, trying to find words that would give him hope. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. It was a small place called Café Fiore, tucked into a corner of Ballard, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching people walk by, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. Emma arrived right on time. I recognized her immediately, even though I'd only seen her face briefly, covered in soot and unconscious. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had a bandage on her left hand and she walked with a slight limp, but she was alive and moving and real. She saw me and smiled, and I stood up, not sure what to do. Should I shake her hand? Hug her? Just nod awkwardly? She solved the problem by walking up and pulling me into a hug. She said, "Thank you. Thank you for saving my life." I hugged her back, and I said, "Thank you for saving mine first." We sat down, and for a few minutes, we just looked at each other, both of us a little overwhelmed. Then Emma laughed, a slightly nervous sound. She said, "I've imagined meeting you so many times over the years. I would see firefighters around the city and wonder if one of them was you. Wonder if you'd gone into medicine or counseling or teaching. I never imagined it would happen like this." I said, "I've imagined meeting the person who wrote the letter too. I used to make up stories about who you were. Sometimes I thought you were a nurse. Sometimes a chaplain. Once I convinced myself you were another patient who had been inspired by my mom's strength." Emma said, "I was just an intern trying to figure out how to handle all the sadness I was seeing every day. Your mother's case affected me deeply. She was so graceful in the face of death. So worried about you, but also so proud. She told me stories about you learning to read, about you winning a science fair in middle school, about you getting into the university. She said you were going to do great things." I felt the tears coming again. I said, "I didn't do great things. I dropped out. I worked at a convenience store. I was barely surviving." Emma reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She said, "You survived, Marcus. That's the great thing. You survived when it would have been easier to give up. And then you turned that survival into a career saving other people. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become." We talked for 3 hours that day. Emma told me about her work as a social worker, how she'd stayed at Sacred Heart after her internship, working with families in crisis, helping them navigate the healthcare system, providing support during the worst days of their lives. She told me about her cat, Mango, who had survived the fire and was currently living with her at her aunt's house. She told me about her father's death 5 years ago, and how she and her mother had grown even closer after that loss. I told her about the Fire Academy, about the struggles and the triumphs, about the calls that haunted me and the calls that reminded me why I loved the job, about the family I'd found at Station 28, about how her letter had been the turning point that changed everything. When we finally left the coffee shop, the sun was setting, painting the Seattle sky in shades of pink and orange. Emma walked me to my car. She said, "Can we do this again? I know this is all very strange, but I'd like to stay in touch. I feel like we have a unique connection." I said, "I would really like that." We exchanged numbers, and as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate clinging to hope that the letter had given me 9 years ago, but a calm, settled hope. The hope that comes from knowing you're not alone. That your life has purpose. That the connections we make matter more than we can possibly understand. Over the next 3 months, Emma and I became close friends. We met for coffee once a week, sometimes twice. We texted regularly, sharing stories about our days, our frustrations, our small victories. It was easy being around her. She understood the weight of caring for people in crisis because she lived it too in her work. Emma and her mother Patricia were staying with Patricia's sister while they navigated insurance claims and decided what to do about the house. The fire investigation had confirmed it was an electrical fault, no negligence, just bad luck. The insurance would cover rebuilding, but the process was slow and bureaucratic. In January, Emma asked if I wanted to help her go through what had been salvaged from the house. The fire department had done a thorough overhaul, and a restoration company had packed up anything that wasn't completely destroyed. It was all in a storage unit in Georgetown. I met her there on a Saturday morning. The storage unit was full of cardboard boxes, furniture wrapped in plastic, the physical remnants of a life interrupted. Emma stood at the entrance, looking overwhelmed. She said, "I don't even know where to start. Most of this is probably ruined, but I need to check. There are things I don't want to lose. Photos, documents, things that belong to my dad." I said, "Let's take it one box at a time. I've got all day." We spent hours going through boxes. Some things were salvageable. Photo albums in protective plastic sleeves, important documents that had been in a filing cabinet, some books that smelled like smoke but were readable. Other things were losses. Clothing that was too damaged, furniture that was waterlogged and warped, sentimental items that hadn't survived. Emma found a box of her father's things and sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, going through them carefully. His watch, tarnished but intact. His wedding ring. A notebook where he'd written down recipes. She held each item gently, tears streaming down her face. I sat beside her and just stayed quiet, giving her space to grieve. After a while, she said, the fire took so much. But I'm alive. And that's because of you. These things are just things. I can't replace my dad, but I can remember him without needing his watch or his notebook. What matters is that I'm here to remember. I understood what she meant. After Mom died, I'd held on to her things like they were sacred relics. Her favorite mug. The blanket she used on the couch. The books she'd been reading. Eventually, I realized that she wasn't in those objects. She was in my memories, in the values she'd taught me, in the way I treated people. The things were just things. We finished sorting through the storage unit by late afternoon. Emma decided to keep the photos, important documents, a few pieces of furniture that could be restored, and her father's personal items. The rest would be donated or disposed of. It was hard, but necessary. She couldn't move forward while carrying the weight of everything she'd lost. As we locked up the storage unit, Emma turned to me. She said, I want to show you something. It's at my aunt's house. Would you mind driving over there with me? I said, of course. Her aunt lived in West Seattle, in a small house overlooking the Sound. Patricia was there when we arrived, and she greeted me with a warm hug. She said, Marcus, it's so good to see you again. Thank you for helping Emma today. And thank you for saving my daughter's life. I will never be able to repay you for that. I felt awkward, the way I always did when people thanked me for doing my job. I said, I'm just glad I was there. I'm glad she's okay. Patricia smiled and said, You're a good man. Your mother raised you right. Emma led me upstairs to the guest room where she was staying. It was small but comfortable, with a view of the water. She went to the closet and pulled out a shoebox. She sat on the bed and gestured for me to sit beside her. She opened the box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. She said, After I wrote you that letter, I started writing to other people. Patients' families who were going through hard times. People I met through my work who seemed like they needed encouragement. I never put return addresses. I just wanted them to know someone cared. Someone was paying attention. She pulled out a small notebook. She said, I kept track. Not in a creepy way, just names and dates. A reminder to myself that words matter. That sometimes the smallest gesture can change someone's trajectory. I've written 63 letters over the past 9 years. I don't know if any of them had the impact yours did. I'll probably never know. But I keep doing it because of what happened with you. I was stunned. I said, You've been doing this for 9 years? Just sending hope to strangers? She nodded. She said, It started with you. Your mother's death affected me so much. I felt helpless, like there was nothing I could do to ease suffering. But then I realized that sometimes people don't need solutions. They need to know they're not invisible. That someone sees their pain and believes they can survive it. So I started writing. I looked through the notebook. Names, dates, brief notes. A father who lost his son in a car accident. A woman going through a divorce while caring for her sick mother. A teenager whose best friend had committed suicide. All people Emma had encountered through her work, all people she'd reached out to in their darkest moments. I said, Emma, do you realize how extraordinary this is? Most people walk past suffering every day. They see it and they look away because it's uncomfortable. But you run toward it. You see someone in pain and you do something about it. She looked down at the notebook. She said, I learned it from watching you with your mother. And then from watching you become a firefighter. You could have let your pain destroy you. Instead, you turned it into purpose. I just tried to do the same thing in my own way. We sat there for a while, both of us thinking about the strange path that had brought us to this moment. A letter written 9 years ago. A fire that almost killed her. A rescue that completed the circle. Finally, Emma said, I have something else to show you. She reached into the shoebox and pulled out a folder. She handed it to me. She said, "Open it." Inside was a copy of the letter she'd written to me. The original was still in my locker at the station, but this was an exact copy in her handwriting. Underneath it were drafts. Earlier versions where she'd crossed out words, rewritten sentences, tried to find exactly the right way to say what she wanted to say. I could see the care she'd put into it, the thought behind every word. This wasn't something she'd dashed off quickly. She'd labored over it, trying to get it right, trying to say something that would matter. I said, "You spent a lot of time on this." She said, "I spent 3 days writing and rewriting it. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted it to give you hope without sounding preachy. I wanted you to know someone cared without making it about me. I must have written 20 versions before I sent that one." I looked at the drafts, at the crossed-out lines and the notes in the margins. In one early version, she'd written, "I know you feel alone, but you're not." She'd crossed it out and written above it, "Someone out there needs the kindness that lives inside you." That was the line that had stuck with me most. The idea that my pain had purpose, that surviving it would enable me to help others. I said, "This line right here. This is the one that changed everything for me. The idea that my suffering wasn't meaningless, that it could be transformed into something useful. That's what made me think about becoming a firefighter." Emma smiled. She said, "I'm so glad." I remember debating that line. I wasn't sure if it was too much, if it was presumptuous to tell you that your pain had purpose. But I believed it. I believed that someone with your capacity for love and endurance would find a way to use those qualities to help others. I folded the drafts carefully and put them back in the folder. I said, "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you ever reach out after you sent the letter? Why didn't you check to see if I was okay?" Emma was quiet for a moment. She said, "I thought about it, especially in those first few months. I wanted to know if you'd received it, if it had helped, if you were surviving. But I was afraid that reaching out would ruin it somehow, that it would make it about me instead of about you. I wanted you to have something that was purely for you, with no obligation attached. No need to thank me or update me or perform gratitude. Just words that were yours to keep." I understood. She'd given me a gift with no strings attached. A lifeline thrown to a drowning person with no expectation of anything in return. That's what had made it so powerful. It wasn't transactional. It was grace. I said, "Thank you. For the letter. For believing in me. For starting me on the path that led to the life I have now. I don't know where I'd be without it, and I don't want to know." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. She said, "Thank you for pulling me out of that fire. Thank you for becoming exactly who I hoped you'd become. And thank you for being my friend through all of this." In February, Emma and Patricia made the decision to rebuild the house on Maple Street. The insurance settlement had come through, and they'd found a good contractor. It would take about 8 months, but by fall, they'd have their home back. Emma threw herself into the planning. She spent hours with architects and designers, choosing materials, deciding on layouts. She said it felt therapeutic, like she was building something new from the ashes of what had been lost. I helped when I could. My shifts at the station were 24 hours on, 48 hours off, which gave me time. I went with her to meet contractors, helped her understand building codes and fire safety requirements. I made sure the new house would have interconnected smoke detectors, fire extinguishers on every floor, and 2 egress points from every bedroom. Emma teased me about it. She said, "You're turning my house into a fortress." I said, "I'm making sure I never have to pull you out of another fire." She laughed, but I was serious. The idea of her being in danger again, of me not being there to help, was something I couldn't handle. I'd lost too many people. I'd arrived too late to too many calls. Emma was someone I'd saved, and I wanted to make sure she stayed safe. In March, Rodriguez called me into his office at the station. He had a serious expression, which usually meant bad news. Budget cuts or policy changes or some administrative headache. But when I sat down, he smiled. He said, "Chen, I'm putting you up for the lieutenant's exam. You've got the experience, the skills, and the respect of the crew. It's time." I was surprised. I'd thought about promotion eventually, but I liked being on the engine, liked being the one going into fires. Leadership meant more paperwork, more administrative duties, less time on the line. I said, "Captain, I appreciate it, but I'm not sure I'm ready. I'm happy where I am." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. He said, "Chen, you've been ready for 2 years. You're already doing the job without the title. The probies look up to you. The veterans respect you. You've got good instincts and you stay calm under pressure. The department needs good leaders, and you're one of them." I thought about it. Mom had always pushed me to do more, be more, reach higher. She'd wanted me to finish college, get a career, build a life I could be proud of. I'd done that, in my own way. But maybe it was time for the next step. I said, "Okay. I'll take the exam." Rodriguez grinned. He said, "Good. Study hard. The test is in May." I told Emma about the promotion opportunity when we met for coffee the next week. She was excited for me. She said, "That's amazing, Marcus. You'll be a great lieutenant. You care about people and you're good in a crisis. That's exactly what a leader needs." I said, "I'm nervous. It's a lot of responsibility. People's lives depend on the decisions I make." Emma gave me a look. She said, "People's lives already depend on the decisions you make. You go into burning buildings. You make life and death choices in seconds. You've been doing this for 9 years. A title doesn't change that. It just recognizes what you're already doing." She was right, of course. I'd been making those decisions all along. The promotion just meant I'd be doing it more formally, with more authority and more accountability. I spent the next 2 months studying fire behavior, building construction, incident command, personnel management, emergency medical protocols. I read textbooks, attended review sessions, practiced scenarios with Morrison and the other veterans at the station. The exam in May was brutal. Written test, oral interview, practical scenarios where they threw impossible situations at you and watched how you handled them. But I'd prepared well, and when the results came back in June, I'd passed. I was officially Lieutenant Marcus Chen. The promotion ceremony was at the department headquarters downtown. Rodriguez pinned the new badge on my uniform. Sarah, Morrison, Jenkins, Cooper, and the rest of a shift were there, cheering and giving me grief in the good-natured way firefighters do. Emma came too, sitting in the audience with her mother, both of them beaming with pride. After the ceremony, Emma pulled me aside. She said, "Your mother would be so proud of you. I wish she could see this." I felt the familiar ache of missing her. 9 years hadn't dulled it, just made it easier to carry. I said, "I think she knows somehow. I think she'd be happy that I found my purpose." Emma said, "I know she would be." In August, the house on Maple Street was nearly finished. Emma invited me to come see it before they moved back in. I drove over after my shift, still in my department polo shirt and jeans. The transformation was remarkable. The new house had the same footprint as the old one, but everything was updated. Modern windows, new siding, a metal roof that would last decades. Inside, the layout was open and bright. New appliances in the kitchen, fresh paint on all the walls, hardwood floors throughout. Emma walked me through each room, pointing out details. The fireplace in the living room. The bay window in her mother's bedroom. The office space where she could work from home when needed. And her own bedroom, rebuilt on the east side where the fire had been worst. She stood in the doorway of that room and said, "This is where you found me. Right here." I was lying between where the bed is now and that window. I don't remember any of it. I woke up in the hospital with my mom holding my hand and the doctors telling me I'd had a close call. I looked at the space, trying to reconcile it with my memory of that day. The smoke, the heat, the desperate search, the moment my hand touched her leg and I knew we'd found her. It seemed impossible that this bright, clean room had been a hellscape of smoke and fire just 9 months ago. I said, "I'm glad I got there in time." Emma turned to me. She said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something. When I was lying there, when I'd given up on getting out, I was thinking about the letters I'd written. I was thinking about you. I was hoping that somewhere out there, you'd gotten my letter and it had helped. I was hoping my life had mattered, even if it ended that day. And then I woke up and found out that you were the one who saved me. That the person I'd tried to help had become the person who helped me. It felt like proof that goodness circulates, that what we put out into the world comes back. I didn't know what to say to that. The idea that she'd been thinking about me while trapped in that room, not knowing I was coming for her, was almost too much to process. Finally, I said, "I think your mother was right about something. She told me at the hospital that first day that you were all she had. But you're not. You have so many people whose lives you've touched. 63 letters. Hundreds of families you've helped through your work. And me. You have me. You're not alone." Emma smiled, tears in her eyes. She said, "Neither are you." We stood there in that rebuilt room, two people connected by tragedy and grace, by fire and words, by the strange paths that lead us to exactly where we need to be. In September, Emma and Patricia moved back into the house. I helped them unpack boxes, arrange furniture, hang pictures. It was good to see them home, to know that something good had come from the fire. The neighborhood threw a welcome home party. People brought food and drinks, stood in the yard catching up, celebrating resilience. Several neighbors told me they remembered the day of the fire, seeing the smoke, hearing the sirens, watching the firefighters work. They thanked me for saving Emma. I deflected as usual, said I was just doing my job, that any of my crew would have done the same. But Emma's mother Patricia pulled me aside. She said, "Marcus, I know you don't like being thanked. I know you say it's just your job. But I need you to understand something. You gave me my daughter back. You gave her a future. You gave her the chance to keep helping people, to keep making a difference. That's not just a job. That's a miracle." I felt the weight of her gratitude, the love of a mother for her child. I thought about my own mother, about how she would have felt if someone had saved my life. I said, "Patricia, your daughter saved me first. She gave me hope when I had none. She pointed me toward a life worth living. I just returned the favor." Patricia hugged me tight. She said, "Then I'm grateful to both of you for saving each other." As the party wound down and the sun set over Seattle, Emma and I sat on the front porch of the rebuilt house. Mango, the cat who had survived the fire, lounged between us, purring contentedly. Emma said, "I've been thinking about something. I want to start a foundation. Something that helps families rebuild after fires. Not just financially, though that's part of it, but emotionally too. Counseling, support groups, practical assistance. I want to help people get through what we went through." I thought about all the families I'd seen over the years who had lost everything to fire. The trauma of it, the displacement, the grief over lost possessions and memories. Most of them got insurance money eventually, but the emotional recovery was harder. There wasn't much support for that. I said, "That's a great idea. You'd be perfect for it. You understand both sides. The loss and the recovery." Emma said, "I was hoping you'd help. Maybe do some training on fire prevention, speak to families about safety, be a voice of experience. You could help people understand what firefighters see, what we can do to prevent tragedies." I said, "I'm in. Whatever you need." She smiled. She said, "We make a good team. The social worker and the firefighter. The letter writer and the lifesaver." I said, "We really do." Over the next few months, Emma worked on establishing the foundation. She filed the paperwork, found board members, started fundraising. I helped where I could, attending meetings, offering input on the fire safety components, connecting her with other firefighters who wanted to be involved. The foundation officially launched in December. They called it Second Chances, which felt appropriate. It was about giving people the opportunity to rebuild, to recover, to find hope after devastation. The launch event was at a community center in Ballard. Emma gave a speech about her experience, about the fire, about the long recovery process. She talked about the importance of community support, of not facing trauma alone. She thanked the firefighters who had saved her life, and she gestured to me in the audience. She said, "One of those firefighters is here tonight. Lieutenant Marcus Chen. He's the reason I'm standing here. He's the reason I have the chance to do this work. But what he doesn't know is that years ago, I wrote him a letter. I was a stranger who saw him going through the worst time of his life, and I wanted to give him hope. I wanted him to know his life had purpose. And he took that hope and turned it into a career saving lives. He became exactly what I believed he could be. And then, in the strangest twist of fate, he saved mine. That's what Second Chances is about. It's about the ways we save each other. The ways we give each other hope. The ways we rebuild not just houses, but lives. The audience applauded, and I felt embarrassed and proud and grateful all at once. After the event, dozens of people came up to talk to me, to thank me, to tell me their own stories of loss and recovery. I listened to each one, understanding now what Emma had understood 9 years ago. Sometimes people just need to be seen, to be heard, to know someone cares. In January 2025, on a cold morning much like the one when I'd received Emma's letter 10 years earlier, I sat in my office at Station 28. I'd been promoted to lieutenant 6 months ago, and I was still getting used to the administrative side of the job. Paperwork, scheduling, budget reviews. It wasn't as exciting as fighting fires, but it was important work. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. She said, "Coffee this afternoon? I have something to show you." I replied, "Sure." The usual place. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. We met at Café Fiori, the same coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation almost 2 years ago. Emma was already there when I arrived, sitting at our usual table by the window. She had a folder in front of her. I sat down and said, "What's up? You look excited about something." She grinned. She said, "Remember I told you about the 63 letters I wrote over the years?" I said, "Yeah." "Your project of sending hope to strangers." She opened the folder. Inside were letters. New ones, addressed to her. She said, 5 of them wrote back. They found me through the Foundation website. They saw my name and realized I was the person who had written to them years ago. And Marcus, they all said the same thing. That the letter changed their trajectory. That it gave them hope when they needed it most. That it helped them survive. I looked through the letters. A woman who had lost her husband and was contemplating suicide until Emma's letter reminded her she had children who needed her. A man who had been struggling with addiction and used Emma's words as motivation to get clean. A teenager who had been bullied and was planning to drop out of school until the letter encouraged them to hold on. Each letter was a testament to the power of words, to the impact of caring, to the difference one person can make by simply paying attention to another person's pain. I said, "Emma, do you realize what you've done? You've saved lives. Not just mine. All of these people. You saved them with nothing but words and belief." She was crying, happy tears. She said, "We saved each other, Marcus. That's what this whole thing has taught me. We're not meant to survive alone. We're meant to hold each other up, to give each other hope, to be the light in someone else's darkness." I thought about the past 10 years. The letter that had saved me. The academy that had shaped me. The fires I'd fought and the lives I'd saved. The friendship with Emma that had brought everything full circle. The foundation that was now helping others rebuild. None of it would have happened without that letter. Without Emma seeing a grieving young man and deciding to care. I reached across the table and took her hand. I said, "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For being my friend. For building something beautiful out of tragedy." She squeezed my hand. She said, "Thank you for running into that fire. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. Thank you for proving that hope is worth holding on to." We sat there for a while, two people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely way, whose stories had woven together into something neither of us could have predicted. When I left the coffee shop that afternoon, the Seattle sky was gray and heavy with rain, typical winter weather. But I felt light. I felt grateful. I felt like I understood something fundamental about being human. We save each other. Sometimes with dramatic rescues from burning buildings. Sometimes with letters written to strangers. Sometimes just by showing up, by caring, by refusing to let someone face their darkness alone. I drove back to Station 28, parked in my usual spot, and walked into the building. My crew was there, preparing equipment, training, joking around. These people who had become my family. This job that had become my purpose. I went to my office and pulled out the original letter from my desk drawer. I'd moved it from my locker when I got promoted, kept it close. The paper was fragile now, soft from years of handling. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were still clear. Your life has purpose. One day you'll save someone's life, and you'll understand why you had to survive this pain. Emma had been right. I had saved someone's life. I'd saved hers. And in doing so, I'd understood that my survival had meaning. That my pain had transformed into purpose. That the worst day of my life had led me to the best parts of it. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer. I didn't need to read it as often anymore. I'd internalized the message. I believed it now, not because someone told me to, but because I'd lived it. My radio crackled. Dispatch calling for a structure fire across town. I grabbed my gear and headed for the engine bay, where my crew was already gearing up. Rodriguez, now battalion chief, gave me a nod. Morrison, who had been promoted to captain, was coordinating with dispatch. Sarah, Jenkins, Cooper, and the newer members of a shift moved with practiced efficiency. As we pulled out of the station, sirens wailing, heading towards someone else's emergency, I thought about Emma. About the letter. About the improbable path that had brought me here. I thought about all the people whose lives intersect in ways we never understand. The nurse who mentioned me to Emma. Emma who wrote the letter. Rodriguez who saw potential in me. Morrison who trained me. Every person I'd ever saved and every person who had saved me. We're all connected. We're all part of each other's stories. We're all both the rescued and the rescuer. The engine raced through Seattle streets, past neighborhoods I knew by heart now, toward another fire, another chance to make a difference, another opportunity to run toward the danger instead of away from it. And as we turned the corner onto the street where smoke was already visible, I felt grateful. Grateful for the pain that had shaped me. Grateful for the hope that had saved me. Grateful for the work that gave me purpose. Grateful for a letter written by a stranger 10 years ago that had changed everything. When I entered the burning house all those months ago, I didn't know the woman inside was the one who wrote me that letter. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we're all saving each other without knowing it. Maybe every act of kindness ripples out in ways we can't predict. Maybe hope is the most powerful tool we have. And maybe, just maybe, the purpose of surviving our own fires is to run into someone else's and pull them out. That's what I was thinking as we pulled up to the burning house, as I grabbed the attack line, as I moved toward the smoke and heat and danger. That's what I was thinking as I did the job I loved. That's what I was thinking as I lived the life that letter had saved.